I'd like to call now Professor David Jones to speak for 10 minutes. Thank you.
Thank you. So my specialism is bioethics, the ethics of our biology, of having a body, of being human, of our mortality. But we're here to think not just about ethics, but about law. And there's a subtle relationship between ethics and law, not a straightforward one, but certainly more important in some areas, and particularly in medical law. And one important thing to say in relation to ethics and law is ethics may be about an individual decision, but law is about everyone. So you have an ethical decision and you have a decision that you have to make for yourself. Ethics is essentially the question, what should I do? And it's a question which we all face. It's an inescapable question. What should I do in this situation? And how do I, what do I think perhaps of other people that I might interact with? But when we think of law, we think of what kind of structures in society will help people make certain kinds of decisions or will inhibit people making certain decisions, and law changes things for everyone. So it's sometimes thought, for example, that if you have a permissive law, a law that makes something possible, which wasn't possible before, then that only affects the people who make use of it. So people would say, well, if you don't want to do this, that's your business, but if somebody does want to do it, it's their business, and it doesn't affect anybody else. But if something has become a possibility, the possibility is real for everyone who is eligible, and it hangs there. Now that possibility, some people think of as reassuring, and indeed one of the reasons that people advocate for change in the law is not necessarily that people would do it, but that people would be able to know that it was always possible. So the knowing it is always possible is also something which is real and active and changes things for everyone who is eligible. And that also means for some people for whom this is not reassuring but is threatening, it changes it for them. It changes it for everyone. So for example, in Canada, because in Canada they have decided that this is a healthcare intervention for the alleviation of pain or suffering, that means that a doctor now has an obligation to mention this as one of the range of possibilities, even if the person hasn't. And in Canada, eligibility is very wide. It's not simply terminal illness, it's not expectation of death even. It's suffering from an incurable physical condition. At the moment, physical condition, though it's scheduled to become also mental condition in 2027. So a doctor first has an obligation to decide if they think that the person might be upset if they raise the issue, though it's rather difficult to know how they would know that without raising the issue. But if they think that the person, it is not incompatible with the person's aims, the doctor has an obligation to mention it. So for everyone who is eligible, when they go in, when they have that diagnosis, that means everyone, when they have that diagnosis, one of the range of options will be, and of course you could end your life. But it could also be that you're not coping at home. It could also be that you have this ongoing issue about lack of about your dependence and going into a care home or so on. The issue of care homes and making it such that this doesn't seem for people worse than death, because it is a motivation for death in all of the jurisdictions that I have looked at where people choose death in this way. So it changes things for everyone. So that's the first thing to say. The second thing is that when we think about law, we shouldn't just learn from our own mistakes. We should learn from the mistakes of other jurisdictions. We should look at what has happened. We should look before we leap. It is very important to look at what has happened. Sometimes it's stated, people give the impression that this is happening everywhere. It's not happening everywhere. There's 14 countries, by my reckoning, which have legal euthanasia or assisted suicide out of whatever, 190 odd countries. So it's not everywhere. In one of those countries, the biggest, United States, it's not in the whole of the United States, it's only in 10 states plus the District of Columbia. So it's not in the most of the United States. But it is in these places. And one thing we find, in Anna Karenina, it says, all happy families are alike, but unhappy families are all unhappy in their own way. And assisted suicide or euthanasia, assisted dying is like that. The way in which it is in the United States and the way it is in Switzerland and the way it is in Holland is different. And sometimes the tendency is to say, oh, which is better and which is worse. But they each have their own problems because of the way in which they have approached it. None of them are without problems, but they have different problems. So if you have a doctor do it, if you have euthanasia, then at least the doctor has to be there. In the United States, in Oregon, once you fulfill the requirements, they give you your lethal drug, which you then go home and put in a cabinet, and you might or might not take it, and it sits there. When you take it, what happens, what the circumstances are, what your capacity is then, the doctor has no control over. The doctor is not usually there. There's usually no doctor there. Whether there are complications, nobody knows. There's no doctor there. In Australia recently, which has they have different systems, but in Queensland, there was a case where a woman was given, she was given the lethal drug, and but she didn't take it. She actually preferred euthanasia in the end, but she still had the drug in the cupboard, and then her husband, in his grief, took the drug. Immediate time of immediate grief is a time of vulnerability to suicide, as indeed diagnosis of terminal disease gives a vulnerability to suicide. But that shows the problem of not having the doctor there. But if the doctor is there, you've arranged for the doctor to come, everybody's around, he's there with a syringe, or she's there with a syringe, then you have but do you still want to do it? And to what degree is that a free choice at that time? And how many people say, actually, no? In Canada, less than 1%, I think. Whereas in Oregon, 30% of people don't take the poison in the cupboard. So, you have somebody there who's responsible, but they're also controlling it. You have nobody there and nobody responsible. Each unhappy family is unhappy in its own way. So it isn't that we think, oh, we can get the right, if we just choose this one rather than this one, then we will get the right system. What happens is each of the systems tend to develop their own problems. And if it happened here, we would have our own problems. In America, it's relatively restricted because medicine is mainly very privatized. This means that gives people choice in one kind of way, but also there's very little social solidarity. There's very little sense of that there's a right to healthcare and you should promote something if you think it's for their health. Whereas in Canada or Australia, which are far closer to us, then they think if this is good, then everyone should have it. Surely, if this is good, you don't want to restrict it. And that's why things get extended. They say, well, if it's good for adults, why not for mature children also? Why can't it be good for them too? If it's good for terminally ill people, why not good for these people too? And so it pushes. It doesn't push so much in America, because in America it's about privacy. It's not really about health. Every unhappy family is unhappy in its own way. So when people talk about the example of Oregon, as though we were like Oregon, as though our health system was like the health system in the United States, which thanks be to God it is not. There is no country in the world that spends so much for so little as the health service in the United States. They miss the way in which it would be a problem here. But in no way is it not a problem. Everywhere is a problem, but it's a problem of a different kind. I'll stop there, thank you.